What's up, everyone? It's Riley here, and today we're going to take a look at the hardcover editions of Kazuo Umezz's classic manga series, Drifting Classroom. Alright, y'all, before we take a look at the books, I wanted to give a huge shout out and thanks to the newest members of the Patreon family, Adam and Peter from the Crushing Crisis blog. Thank you so much, guys, for helping me to make this channel better. If anyone out there who enjoys what I do on this channel would like to support me, then you can also follow the link down below to my Patreon. Members of the Patreon family do get access to more content than what I put on the channel, just a few exclusive videos and some behind-the-scenes notes and stuff on the videos that I put out every week. As well, if you haven't yet, please check out my other channel, the Omnibus Collectors Network. Every week, multiple times a week, I join a crew of other YouTubers to talk about comics, manga, video games, movies, different news, and all kinds of stuff. We have a great time. Please join them and check out what we have to do over there. Alright, without further ado, let's start talking about Drifting Classroom. So, this series is a classic horror manga by creator Kazuo Umezz, or as he's credited on a lot of stuff, Umezz with two Z's. The series was published weekly in the Weekly Shonen Sunday magazine from 1972 to 1974 and was originally collected across 11 volumes. The series is focused on a school in Japan which mysteriously transports itself and the 800 plus students and faculty members within to a strange and unknown wasteland where they must now fight for their survival against monsters, against starvation, and against each other. The original 11 paperback editions were printed in English by Viz back years ago under their signature line, but those have gone long out of print and have been hard to find for quite a while. So finally, when Viz decided to release these new definitive edition hardcovers, it was a very welcome reprinting for the series. Now let's take a look at the build of the actual hardcovers. I like to look and see how these volumes are put together, how nicely they're done, and if you happen to own the paperback editions, kind of to give an idea of what these look like so you can decide for yourself whether or not these are worthwhile to upgrade into. I will say that I cannot make any comparisons directly to the paperback editions because I do not own them, so I can't speak for exactly how they look, but I can just speak on the quality of the build of these hardcovers. Alright, here are the 3 volumes lined up together. This is what it would look like on the shelf. You can see the design on the spine connects to form one image. This is taken from the interior artwork of the book, and the title of Drifting Classroom by Kazuo Umezz kind of drifts down the spine, going lower with each volume. The covers are also presented in a monochromatic red, orange, or yellow on each of the 3 volumes. Alright, and then we can take a look at the front covers of each volume. The designs on the front are each, like I said, monochromatic in red, orange, and yellow. And you can see the title of Drifting Classroom is split from the bottom and reappears on the top. And this, I would say, is kind of thematic in that it's relating to the titular classroom itself drifting through time. So we get the title drifting across the cover. Now taking a look at the back covers, more monochromatic, just red, orange, and yellow. And we have the description of the contents of the books in here as well. At the top of the descriptions that are given, the definitive edition of Kazuo Umezz's timeless horror classic. And then it has the Viz signature and Viz Media logos on the bottom there. The books do come with a sticker for the price, which is $35, and that sticker does come placed right on top of the logo there, and it's very easy to remove without having any sort of remnants left behind. Alright, now let's get a little close and personal. It's hard to tell on the camera, but you can see it's not a glossed texture to the hardcover of the volumes. It is a matte finish, and it does have a little bit of a rough texture. There's not much roughness, but the quality of the stock of paper they used for these hardbacks does give it a little bit of a texture on there. Not quite the soft leathery feel of the Dark Horse editions of Hellsing or Berserk, but just to give another Viz example, if you look at the hardcover editions of Fullmetal Alchemist, these have a much more smooth finish than what we get from Drifting Classroom. Also, all of the text on the covers and on the backs of each volume and on the spine is all embossed in there, so that does have a little bit of a texture to it. All right, now opening up the book, first thing we see is orange end pages, and this leads straight into the story. Now, this one is kind of interesting because it does go through a whole chapter before it actually gets to like the title pages and stuff like that. You can also see it has a nice thick paper stock. It's not glossy. It is a matte finish paper stock, but it is a nicer paper stock than, say, the typical edition of a Viz manga that has more of a pulpy newsprint feel to it, but not. Those are not as pulpy and as cheap feeling as those 3-in-1 omnibus that Viz publishes. So it is a nice thick paper stock, really nice paper right there. Now here's something that I thought was an interesting touch. They give a title page that actually gives the contents of all 3 of the hardcover volumes. So right off the bat, they're showing us exactly how the series is separated, and it shows you what all of the chapter titles are between all 3 of the volumes. And then a couple of pages after this, we get into the actual title page for this volume and the contents of this volume before heading right into the story. And that is standard in the next 2 volumes as well, as they will give you the contents of that volume. Now if we turn to the back, we once again have the orange end pages, and this is the last page right there, continued in volume 2. And then we have all the information about the author and about the publication of the book and stuff here at the end. And there's a few pages from the last pages of story in this book. Now, of course, we also want to take a look at the binding on any large hardcover volume like this. So you can see it's got a pretty thick book block there. It is about 750 pages. 750 pages seems to be about standard between the 3 volumes. Now we'll just open it from the middle there. And it does have a pretty decent sewn binding that will keep it open. Obviously, it's not quite as good because it is a little bit thicker for a smaller volume when compared to like the Dark Horse hardcovers. And you can already see that it is kind of closing on itself. So this one, unlike the Dark Horse ones, is not going to stay open as well when I just have it a few pages open. But it doesn't clamp shut so bad like a glued binding hardcover like some of DC's older omnibus editions. So it's got a decent sewn binding, but not the best. You can see straight through that eye hole, so it does open pretty wide, and I never had any instance while reading the books where I had to worry about gutter loss and losing any of the image because of its tight binding or anything like that. Alright, now let's talk about the series itself. I kind of gave a brief description of what the manga is about, but I wanted to talk also about kind of how I felt about it, how I enjoyed it, and kind of who might enjoy this series. So I am a fan of horror. I'm a fan of horror movies, horror comics, and all kinds of stuff, and horror manga. And of course, being a fan of horror and being a fan of manga means that I own all of the Junji Ito books, as I'm sure a lot of people like me do. And this was one that I was really excited about because it's a horror series that is considered a classic manga. And in that, I felt like it was something I definitely had to jump on and pick up. I will say, ultimately, really quick, I was not disappointed in this. I had a lot of fun reading this, and honestly, I'm usually not a huge fan of older manga. I think a lot of it has to do with how well it's translated, because even if it's something that's older, like this being from the 70s, it is getting a translation now by someone who has more of a modern sensibility. But it also comes back down to whether or not you're turned off by an older style of artwork as well. And I do think that one of the major points of criticism does lie in Umezz's artwork. And I don't know if this is something that carries across a lot of his works, but it's something that I had to point out here, and that is the fact that he does kind of suffer from same face with a lot of his characters. A lot of the characters that appear in the book, it's hard to kind of differentiate between them. Usually it just comes down to remembering who has what hairstyle. But for the most part, each character has the same basic face, which makes it, like I said, hard to differentiate and identify them. However, whereas he does suffer from same face, I would say that that's really the only downside to his art style. I know he's not as stylish and modern as current horror manga master Junji Ito, but he has a style that works so well. I feel like Umezz has a very atmospheric sense of the darkness that he uses in his artwork that feels very similar to watching like an older black and white movie, where it was important at the time to use that contrast of dark and light since you didn't have the ability to use color. And in that, I feel like it's hard to imagine this series existing in color. And I say that because a lot of readers of manga, especially newer readers of manga, are always criticizing, saying like, oh, I don't like black and white comics. This would be so much cooler if it was in color. But this is something that I honestly could not imagine with color. And in that, it doesn't even have colored covers. As I mentioned, looking over the overview of the book, each cover is just monochromatic in that it takes one color and washes over everything with it. Even the classic covers don't really have fully colored artwork on the covers. Instead, it's just a couple of colors they use for a wash over the artwork. Now, reading the story itself, I didn't know anything about the story going into it, which I think was great because I had no expectations. All I knew is that a lot of people enjoyed it, and for the first time in years, it was going to be available and in a really nice oversized hardcover edition. So I jumped on it, and even though it had a pretty steep price point at $35, I felt, let me grab that first hardcover and give it a try, because I tend to enjoy especially classic horror manga, like Devilman and stuff, so I figured I'll probably enjoy this. And it took a little bit to get going, which tends to be the case with a lot of series. But once it did get going, it was something that was hard to put down. It was something that I constantly was just anticipating what is going to happen to these kids next. And now, as I mentioned earlier, you don't really know what has happened. You just have this school that has been thrusted with all of its inhabitants, the faculty and the students, into this strange wasteland. And as they get there, you're following this group of people as they try to kind of cope with whatever it is that's happening. And each chapter of the series winds up making way to some sort of new happening, some sort of new tragedy or obstacle that befalls the cast. And eventually it comes down to something that I'd have to assume is inspired by kind of Lord of the Flies, where you wind up seeing the kids have to exist within this strange desert around the school by themselves and have to learn how to survive. And they eventually break into different camps of children that wind up having rivalries and fighting against one another. Now, as well as assuming that Umezz is inspired by Lord of the Flies, I had to also assume that he was inspired, like a lot of Japanese media, he was also inspired by the bombing on Hiroshima. And I looked a little bit more into this because at first it was just the idea of like, oh, well, it's this barren wasteland. Maybe that's, something about how the bomb would have wiped out Japan and stuff like that. But upon a little bit more research, I found that Umezz was actually born about 9 years prior to the bomb hitting, which means that he would have been around the age of the children in this story when the incident happened. And I did a little bit of research, and I saw a couple of other people mention this, but I didn't see anything about the creator himself mentioning it, so I don't know whether it's true or not. But to me, it would seem that he was taking his own experience as a child, seeing this happen around him, and maybe create this story where he has to put himself into the situation that he believed might have come out of the bombing. And I want to believe that this post-apocalyptic wasteland that he created here as this futuristic version of Japan, which is overrun by mutated humans and all kinds of different horrors, is one that he may have believed they were going to have to live through after the events of the bomb. Now, the series itself wasn't published until the 70s, so I'm sure there's a lot of other cultural impact that kind of bled into this story. Like I said, Lord of the Flies being one thing, the bomb being another thing, and then just in general, I think the economic and ecological climate that was in Japan at the time probably bled into this series, especially because further thoughts about the title, especially after I had finished it, kind of led me to see this as Umezz making a statement on how the youth in Japan were going to have to be the ones to fix the country. How the youth at the time were about to be put into the place where they needed to make up for all of the issues and the mistakes of the generation before them in trying to make Japan a better place. And a little bit of spoilers here for the very end of the series, but that's kind of the note he leaves us on, is that the children who are in the class, the remaining surviving children at the end of the storyline, are left in this future version of Japan to try and repopulate and make the world better. Now, I do not claim to be any sort of historical scholar at all. In fact, history was my worst subject in all of school, high school and college. So I might be off on a couple things there, but I'd have to assume that these outside influences are really what bled into his creation of this series. And I think that and just seeing those influences so clearly is really what makes this such a fascinating piece. Because it's not just a horror comic, it's not just a horror manga, it is a statement made by the creator about the world that they were living in and some of the things that he had to live in as he had grown up. So while the conclusion might feel a little bit abrupt and maybe less than ideal, it was one that became more of a rewarding experience after I sat back and thought on it for a couple of minutes. So I really wind up appreciating this a lot more the more I kind of ruminate on it and let it marinate in my mind. Now, the series definitely reads as a classic piece of manga literature, so if you are completely not into older manga series stuff from the 70s, then you might not enjoy this. But I think that anyone who has an appreciation for classic horror movies or does like classic comics and stuff, you might want to check this out. I think that this is something that transcends just the idea of being a horror story or even transcends its own medium as a piece of manga. I think it truly encapsulates the idea of being an important piece in the canon of Japanese literature. So in the end, who do I recommend this series to? I'd say if you do like horror, if you like classic horror, horror comics, horror manga, then definitely give this one a try. And I'd say especially if you are into Lovecraftian horror, then this is something that you would want to look into. So thank you so much everyone for watching the video. I hope that once again this was informative, and I hope that this was entertaining, and I hope that this helps some people make up their mind whether or not they want to buy this hardcover set. This is a beautiful set of hardcover books that looks great on the shelf and also provides a really fantastic story that really had me thinking a lot more and a lot deeper than I thought I would. So again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys on the next one. Peace out.